What is up, everybody, and welcome to the All-NBA Show, part of the All-City Podcast Network. I'm your host, Adam Mares. Legs has the day off as he is traveling, getting ready to cover another game, but I brought in the next best thing. To talk Timberwolves with me today, the great Dane Moore of the Dane Moore Podcast. Dane, what's going on?
What's up, Adam? No, I am Tim Legler. I am Tim Legler.
There you go.
Let's do this.
Let's do this, man. I called you, a couple days ago. I was like, let's talk Timberwolves. We'll do a Thursday show. It's going to be great. Good slate, but we can run through the games. But there were two really big games last night. The Thunder fall to the Nuggets. The Celtics fall to the Warriors. Both those teams look borderline unbeatable out of the gate, but they both dropped games last night. So we're going to talk about both of those. And then later in the show, we'll do a deep dive on the Timberwolves as well. But we're going to start. I did not expect this to be the top story. In fact, I was thinking last night, going to the Nuggets game, there was a great slate of games. I was thinking like, man, I'm going to watch the Nuggets. I'm going to get home late and I'm going to have to watch another game. Turned out to be the game of the night because the shorthanded Nuggets, missing Jamal Murray and Aaron Gordon, host the Oklahoma City Thunder, who have been smacking everybody, 12 points or more in every single game, absolutely dominant defensively. They got kind of torched by the Nuggets. It was a great game. The Nuggets got torched by the Thunder, but the Nuggets get 124 points on that Oklahoma City defense last night. I thought it was really impressive, Dane. But what did you see from that one?
Yeah, I thought it was interesting. I'm watching the first half of that game, and you're getting the good Russ game, right? And the Nuggets are still kind of getting smacked, right? And I just started thinking about it from a Thunder perspective, where I'm like, it feels like to beat this Thunder team right now, it's going to take a really good team and a team that's figured itself out a little bit. So you think about the other top Western Conference teams like Denver, who is obviously in a little disarray from a little bit of roster change. And then not to mention Gordon Murray going out. That is not a team that has itself figured out yet. So you wouldn't have thought that would be a team that could beat the Thunder. The Wolves would fit that as well, right? Where you're kind of adjusting. So I was sitting there in the first half and I'm like, man, what teams in the West can beat the Thunder? And you kind of think about Dallas, who seems to know what their identity is. Maybe Phoenix, maybe Golden State. But frankly, I didn't really think Denver could do that, having watched them thus far this season, even though it was at home. But what we finally saw from Denver was it wasn't just Russ and Jokic, because when the third quarter came around, they got Mike going and they got the rest of the group, and Russ sustained. So I was probably putting OKC on too high of a pedestal there of like, it needs to be the right team at the right time that knows itself, that can take them down. I don't know. Do you get what I'm saying with that?
100%. 100%. Because this Thunder
did last night change it?
Well, it changed a couple things, honestly, about, because I thought the Thunder played well. This wasn't a game where they shot well. They shot 40% from three. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander got going. Like they had J-Dub almost had a triple-double. Like it was a game where guys played really well. And when you brought up a good point, in the first half, Jokic has it going, Russell Westbrook has it going, and they're getting killed. Denver's getting killed. Like Oklahoma City's handling them. And what you're hinting at, I think, is that the Celtics, and we'll talk about the Warriors in a little bit, and the Thunder, to me, are the two teams that look like they're in mid-season form. The rotations are on point. The execution on the offensive end is on point. Guys are in the right spots, and the timing on everything is great, and they seem to know their rhythm. But what's in Denver, by the way, the opposite of that, right, has not been on point at anything. This is really their first good win of the year. But what happened in the second half, so you're shorthanded Jamal Murray and Aaron Gordon. Denver has a whole new identity. They have to play their young guys, something Calvin Booth has been begging Malone to do for a year and a half now. They're forced to do it through injuries. And what happened in the second half was Denver's replacements, Christian Brown, Peyton Watson, even Zeke Naji to a much, much lesser extent, those guys are young, energetic, and they can play defense. And I think Denver, what they found in that second half was turn the tempo up, get stops, and then get out and run on the break. And that third quarter was played at an incredible pace. Denver really sped up the game. And I think for the first time all year, Oklahoma City looked to me like they got sped up. They're comfortable offense that they like to get into. They're very methodical. They space you out in the half court. Shea does his thing and breaks everybody down, and then it's just hit the open shooters or score. And in that, I thought the Thunder started like just out of rhythm. They started going a little too quick. Guys didn't know if it was their turn to shoot or if they should try to attack or what have you. And it snowballed. Denver was getting stops and running in the break over and over again. And I think it's interesting, not because I think it's something Denver's still figuring out if they can do that consistently, but the Thunder didn't handle that well. And it was the first time where I go, wow, there's something there that they don't handle correctly.
I don't think they thought that Denver was going to speed it up. I think they thought they were just going to play through Jokic the whole time. Yeah. Because Jokic was killing it, and Oklahoma City doesn't really have a matchup for that, right? And so they're bringing the doubles, and I think they're like, if we can kind of contain Jokic, make this a little bit difficult for Jokic, he's going to try and both be the passer and the scorer in the second half, which naturally, when you're kind of playing through him, it's going to be a little bit slower, the pinch post, the elbow, the whatever, in that sort of way. So when they started running a little bit, and when the Nuggets defense kind of activated themselves to move, and then you got Porter starting to make some threes, semi-transition ones like that, it felt like for that, the lead just kept kind of going away, and almost like Oklahoma City didn't believe that Denver had that gear. This is a little run, this is a little run. Okay, it's Russ. Russ is going to get some. He's going to go downhill some, and he's going to run, and he's going to sprint through it. But to me, it exposed their size some for the first time this season, where they both couldn't really contain not only Jokic in the post, but Russ, the paint felt loose for him to get through the whole time there too. So I thought Denver got some of that transition, started playing faster. That caught Oklahoma City off guard a little bit. And then also when Denver was forced to play in the half court, they still were able to press both the Russ and Jokic button. And that's tough. That's tough if Mike's hitting threes.
The Jokic button was incredible in this game. I mean, he is having, I was thinking about this last night as I was just like, rewatching the highlights and kind of going through the box sheet. I don't want to say this is the best Jokic's ever looked, because there's been a lot of stretches like this for Jokic over the years where it's like a 10 games where you look back at it and you go, oh my God, he's averaging a 30-point triple-double for, this point. But it's as good, and especially on the offensive end. And for one reason, I think Jokic looks around after the first two losses of the season and goes, we don't have the offense we used to have where I can be diplomatic and throw it around. I have to be a battering ram. And this is battering ram Jokic season right now. He is going at the rim nonstop, trying to score. And so the numbers are getting gaudy. 23 points, 20 rebounds, 16 assists. 23 points you look at and go, that's not too many. Dane, they did not want him to score in this game. They were double and triple teaming every time to make him not a scorer. And he still was finding his way through. And I don't think Jokic can do this for 82 games. Yet, not at age 30. I mean, he's carried the team for a long time. But right now, he seems to understand that he has to go Shaq mode and just attack every possession. And I honestly watch it and I go, it's impressive. I don't think he can keep it up, but what he's doing right now is it levels the playing field on a team that the Thunder probably had, 8 of the top 10 or 11 players in this game. And he just made up that gap.
Well, you and I have had this conversation a million times about like how you're going to guard Jokic, right? And if you're going to bring the doubles, okay, you're going to make him a passer. If you're going to try to single cover him, he's going to be a scorer, right? Well, given the lack of just overall offensive firepower they have right now, specifically last night without Gordon and Murray, well, Jokic is turning into a different degree where he's like, I'm going to be both. Right. They are trying to take away my scoring and making me a passer, but I need to be a scorer too. And he doesn't do that. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but he doesn't really do that if he is surrounded by enough offensive personnel around him. And he will just be the passer. Okay, Dort, you're going to come down and double. Here we go. There's an open three for Porter, right? Like he just does that. But given that they don't have enough shooters, or when the double was coming down off of Watson's guy or Brown's guy, Jokic sometimes selectively chose to just kind of power through, wasn't getting a whistle, still did. Yep. And I just think that reminds me of the first MVP season where he was just like, I got to be both. I got to be, and it's just been a while since I've sort of seen him click into that gear or opt to click in that, because he could do that every night, right, to some extent. But that goes back to can he do that for all 82 games, at age 30 here? But he did last night, and the Oklahoma City Thunder did not have anything for that.
I love that you brought up I think it's 2021, right? The first Jamal Murray missed the time he missed the whole season, because then it was obvious he had to be more aggressive. But I even think it's a level up from that. And I like your point about Jokic, because he has in years past, Michael Porter misses 3 straight in a row, or the team collectively missed 4 or 5 straight in a row, and he's still throwing the pass. And you sit there and you go, Jokic, like, they're missing some. They need you to calm them down. Just go through the double team. He has no problem with that now. And there were a lot of times where he had Hunter Tyson open, who's a good shooter, but young guy, Julian Strawther open, and he looked him off. And Jokic never looks guys off, but he almost kind of understands, like, no, I have to do this. I have to keep being aggressive. And so again, not looking him off in a bad way, looking him off in a way of, like, I know the team needs me right now just to keep smashing into the paint and trying to score. And it's just, it's a whole new Jokic. And the other part of this is the 3-point shot. Last night he goes just 1 of 3, but the fact that he's taking so many this year, I think, is also an acceptance of, my preferred style is to be the passer and score because I have to. Never take threes unless I absolutely have to. He now kind of understands that he has to do a lot of scoring, including the 3-point shot. And I think I always ask myself, how can Jokic get better? It's mentality. And this, not that he's going to have to go to this all the time. You hope Michael Porter and Jamal Murray step up and guys kind of get their legs under him. But he seems to understand that when needed now, I can turn my mind into that mode more consistently. And what is it, 8 games into the season? He's been in that mode pretty much every game.
Well, what gear has he not tapped into this season, right? Like, I remember watching 2 full Nuggets games before the Wolves played the Nuggets last week, right? And it was the Clippers game and it was the Nets game. And in the Clippers game, he shoots 12 threes, right? Because it's Zubats and it's the single coverage sort of thing. And he did I'm watching that game and I'm like, okay, here's Jokic, like, understanding that his 3 is good offense here, which I think, to your point, sometimes he's like, there's something better here than me just taking a top of the key semi-contested 3. But he was like, okay, if you're going to give it to me 12 times, I mean, I don't know. How many times has Jokic taken more than 10 threes in a game, period? But then the next night, or the next game that I watched, that Brooklyn game, it's a tiny team, right? Yeah. They don't have a Zubats on him. And he shoots 0 threes in that game, 0. Yeah. And he just went through the post. And at the end of the game, he just took over and that went into overtime, right? Like, so it's always fun to watch Jokic, but it's fun even in the course of a game, or for sure over the course of the week, you're seeing different versions of him, particularly curtailed to what the opponent is. And I think that's what you're getting at when it's a level up. It's not just him hitting the same button over and over again. It's this button in this matchup, this button here. They're all great buttons, but it gets to a special level when he, particularly with the 3-point shot, like, that is good enough, man. Like, you can hit that high 30s. Like, take that if they're giving it to you.
And Russell Westbrook, by the way, to his credit, Jokic's ability to adapt to play any style of basketball is one of the reasons I thought, everybody laughs about the Russell Westbrook, but it might work for us. The one reason I buy into that narrative was I was like, well, Russell Westbrook is good at some stuff, and Jokic's good at everything. So he can go around whatever it is that Russ is good at. And we saw this last night. I mean, Russ has 2 starts now with Jamal Murray out, and he's been great in both games. And the thing about Jokic last night, or about the Nuggets last night, Jamal Murray is the slowest player in the NBA, slowest point guard. This is statistically true. He crosses half court slower than anyone else on average, bringing the ball up. Sure. Loves to slow it down. And if you look at last year's roster, KCP, not exactly a fast break kind of player. Even Michael Porter, not necessarily. So the team was comfortable just being a constant half court team. And that's been their MO, honestly, for 9 years. You get Russell Westbrook on the team and you get some young guys, all of a sudden Jokic's playing fast and is thriving at it. And I think that is the big change for the Nuggets this year is they're going to have to learn a transition game that they have not actually been good at, other than Jokic's touchdown passes, which he loves to throw. They're not necessarily a team that gets out, runs the lane, and finishes at the rim, but they were that last night when it mattered. And I actually think that part of it is the most interesting thing. Can Russell Westbrook inject some speed and transition game into the Denver Nuggets? And when Jamal Murray comes back, presumably tomorrow, will he match with that? Or is it like Russ pushing the team forward, Jamal slowing the team back? I'm curious to see how that evolves, because I think the Nuggets have to be a transition team given their offensive personnel.
Yeah, it's interesting with Jokic. Like, he obviously sees the value in transition, but he wants to do the hit ahead pass,
Yeah.
not necessarily be the sprinter himself
Yeah.
every single time. And to his credit, last night he was pushing pace individually as well. I am interested to see what that dynamic looks like with now, like, Russ has a little bit of clout, right? Of like,
Yep.
I've played well some, and and Murray has his way of playing, and how does that, I don't want to say clash, but maybe clash. I do think, and just credit to you and your guys, DNVR, like, you have the right mentality with Russ that none of the rest of us have, which is, you're like, we have to accept this. And through that acceptance, you see the positives.
Right.
You do. And it doesn't mean that there aren't the negatives. I mean, the chaos is still there,
Yeah.
but none of the rest of us bother to do it because, like, well, I don't know. Like, I don't care. Like, it's like, it's gonna be what it's gonna be. But you guys are, understanding that there's the constant of the chaos that is Russ, but beneath that or around that, often are other things that he can do. And yeah, in these last two games, we're seeing how those things fit, specifically with Jokic. And it's theoretically, right, they get more and more of a rhythm over time, because this is only 2.5 weeks, 2 weeks, whatever, into the season. But maybe Russ needs to find that chemistry with Jamal as well. He needs to be just as intentional about that, and Jamal needs to be probably just as intentional about including that as Jokic has been about, because it really feels like Jokic believes in Russ when you watch the game.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, you've watched all the game. Like, has Jamal looked like that at all when he's out there with Russ?
Not without Jokic, and I think that's really the biggest question here. Is Jokic affords you a lot of, like, covers a lot of sins on offense. Okay, you can't shoot, that's fine. Jokic will space the court. Now you have an empty paint to go to. You get to the rim, but you don't finish well. Well, Jokic seals his man on those pick and rolls so well that you just have to drop him to the floater zone and he makes the shot. And Russ has been phenomenal at two things that really work well with Jokic. One, getting the ball inside. He's a really good, like, post-entry passer. Really good. And he's thrown, obviously, the fundamental ones to Jokic, which are so Jokic doesn't have to extend too far out to the wing, and now he's given up 5 feet of positioning. Russ is really good at getting him the ball on the block, so he already has you kind of deep. But he's also good at threading the needle on a lot of tough passes where the window is really tight, and he just zips a pass, Jokic gets it and scores. So he's good at that. And then the other thing he's really good at is cutting. And I actually think, when everybody has talked about Denver spacing, which is a real issue because they don't have great three-point shooters, but shooting is not the only part of spacing. Cutting is a huge part of spacing, because when defenses come to double, the rotations behind them are made simple if you're stagnant, but very complicated if you have well-timed cuts on the backside. Christian Braun, to me, is a 10 out of 10 cutter off ball. The timing, the angles, the instincts of how to play that spot is really good. But Russell Westbrook's right there as well because of his speed. You turn your head just for a second, or the moment you take a step to double Jokic, he dives with full speed. Jokic throws him that, and all of a sudden it's a freight train. So I look at that. Peyton Watson's been good at cutting. Peyton, Christian, Westbrook, those are the three guys you worry they can't shoot the ball. But what we're learning is they cut at an elite level, and that is starting to create a lot of difficulty for teams to match up and create spacing in a different way.
Adam, I think that, in my opinion, the depth part of the Jokic post is the most important part of that. Because, I mean, and this is, I know from covering Cat for so many years, teams would intentionally try to push him off of his spot, and this quote unquote post up turns into like an 18-foot square up. That is an extremely different thing. That's actually like anti-spacing, because now you're just existing and holding in the mid-range there. With Jokic in particular, if he can get a deep catch, whether by getting his own position and the ball delivered to him, well, now, depending on how he's being covered, if it's just in single coverage, okay, now he's deep enough to one dribble into the hook, right? Into becoming a scorer. But also the depth is important when he's getting doubled, because now the guy who's digging has to come in a lot deeper. And that's not as often where you see the cutters, but that's where you see the spacing. And that's where the kick out to Porter is coming from. So provided that Jokic can be intentional about catching with depth, I think you're going to get those cutters, but you're also going to get more spacing surrounding him there, and have the good shooters like Porter Jr. and Murray, be able to knock those down. And also, like, okay, if it's going to be, Peyton Watson, at least it's going to be an open one, and that becomes passable offense, right? Rather than a semi-contested. I just think if you're playing through your big in the post in the NBA today, it is only a profitable proposition if that big is catching with serious depth. Otherwise, it's just a post-up isolation, and that's hard to score a point of possession on, even for Jokic,
Yeah. And in the first game, Chet got the better of Jokic. Chet was phenomenal in that opening night game between the Thunder and Nuggets. Chet was unbelievable and really wore Jokic down off the dribble offensively in that one. I thought one of the reasons that he was able to have an impact was exactly what you're saying. The entry passes weren't great for Jokic. He got a couple steals just from like three-quarter fronting and then getting around Jokic. And in this game, not the case at all. Jokic had him buried. Jokic was attacking him and was able to get that deep post position. Another thing that happened that was interesting in this game, Denver played a lot of zone. And it was funny because I talked to the players afterwards and they said, yeah, we put that in this morning at shoot around. So it wasn't even a thing Denver had really worked on. It's like a 3-2 or almost a 1-2-2 zone there that Denver was running. And they ran it for a long period, not just a mix it up. They ran it for a long time. And it really, I don't want to say disrupted. I mean, they scored 122 points. This was an offensive game, this one. But it did kind of still, when I talk about the pace disrupted the rhythm, the zone disrupted the rhythm, you just take note with a young team of, okay, they can be knocked off of what makes them good. And then how do they respond to that? And I actually thought they responded well. I just thought Denver outplayed them. But that was a note to me, and I'm curious to see how much teams try to go to that more. Maybe let's zone up a little bit, especially if we have guys up top that can somewhat contain Shea. Shea was awesome, but I thought Christian Brown did a very good job on him. So I thought that was interesting.
But Russ was at the point of the spear, and it looked like a 1-2-2 to me because Russ was kind of staying at the top there. My instinct or initial reaction to a zone is like, well, we just can't guard you,
which is usually how you would put it out there. Yeah.
And it would make sense in that matchup last night when you don't have Gordon. Yep. And so I was like, oh, and like when they went to it, I think the Nuggets were already down by 8 or 10. And I'm like, they can't compete in this game, but sometimes zone works. And sometimes, what would you say, dysregulates or, just kind of
disrupts,
takes them off of what it is. I know you want to move on to other things, but I do want to ask you quickly about, because you said the Chet guarding him and getting around him point. They went to Chet on him a lot less. But in the fourth quarter, they would have Caruso as the Jokic primary, and then they had Chet kind of coming over doing the Gobert thing from last year in the playoffs against the Wolves. And I think if I'm Oklahoma City, we need to have that gear defensively to go into against Denver as well. Not just because the Wolves did it and beat Denver last season, but I do think it's an interesting option just in general, and it's a third thing to be able to do. So Caruso being that guy is not going to be it.
It's too little.
If that's Hartenstein, what if that's Hartenstein as the primary, and then Chet is kind of lurking in the lane at the rim? Because the reality of the situation for Denver is even once they're back healthy, there's going to be a guy that Oklahoma City can leave. Yeah. They can leave Gordon, at a minimum. And maybe, Brown's hitting them now, but you're going to be able to go to that look a lot. The Wolves had a lot of success with that look against Denver last season in the playoffs. And I just think if I'm Oklahoma City, I'm thinking now we got to have a little bit more for this team across the board than we thought. And I think that's part of it. I'm just really curious to see the Hartenstein fit in this whole thing. And I think he might dysregulate their offense a little bit more than people are thinking about. He's just a very different type of offensive player. I know he's a good passer and all that, but it's a change. I do think he could be a weapon defensively for them that way, and that it allows Chet to be a rim protector while he's the big body.
There's no question, because that's the best way to do it. And you look at Minnesota, and Jokic had a very good series against the Timberwolves last year, put up some monster numbers. Game 5 was one of the most dominant games I've seen a guy play. But nonetheless, we know, he really only had one great game in that series, and it was Game 5. He had a lot of very, very good games, but only one great one. And honestly, that's probably all you can hope for. And that was Gobert in the Chet role, and then Cat on the Hartenstein role. Cat grew into a very good Jokic, like the main guy you would put on him. He was very, very good at guarding him in that way. And so I agree with you that I think that is right. But there was something interesting that what happened with Caruso last night, which was Jokic guarded him and ignored him. And the Thunder are so good because of their ability to space you out. And Caruso shot 40% from 3 last year. but when you watch him shoot, you don't really buy that. And more importantly, if you're talking about the top level, like when this gets to playoffs, when we go to the top level, Caruso is so fantastic in his versatility, but it does change things when they can't space out. It's the same with Boston, by the way. They space the court so incredibly well, and it's part of why teams are always running around and guys are wide open. But if you take one piece of that equation out, it just makes it all a lot easier. And last night, I thought that was very loud, how much Caruso made things hard for Shea in the clutch.
It felt like the bad Giddey games, right? From last year, where that would just, he felt like Giddey. And he's doing more on the defensive side of the ball. So there's a little counterbalance there, But yeah, it stood out. Yeah. And that's a pretty, Oklahoma City would just go away from that last year. They would just not play Giddey, particularly in fourth quarters, end of games, if that was working for the defense, right? If they were ignoring him. Oklahoma City now, because it's Caruso, are they going to be more willing to push through that and live with their offense having a little less spacing and finding other ways to go to it? Yeah, it's solved. You're right. If Caruso just is a 40% guy, but yeah, I mean, there's a big difference between what your 3-point percentage is and what it looks like.
And even then, you just don't want to, if you're a great team like the Thunder, you don't want to have your fourth quarter clutch time be 4 wide open Caruso threes. Like, you live with that in the regular season. But when it comes to like game 5, pivotal game 5, you're like, is our whole season going to come down to whether or not he hits open threes? Like, that's a little uncomfortable. So you saw a little vulnerability. I mean, I will say this. The Nuggets played an 8-man rotation and really a 7.5-man rotation. Zeke Naji played just 10 minutes. They treated this like a playoff game. The Thunder, on the other hand, played 10 guys. So there was a little bit of, if you're the Thunder, you're probably bummed because it's the first loss of the year, but you probably look at that and go, really outlier performance, at least to date, from Peyton Watson, Russell Westbrook, even Hunter Tyson, and probably should have still been a win. They fumbled it down the stretch. So I think you're still very encouraged if you're a Thunder fan of what happened. But for the first time this season, I feel like we saw a vulnerability out of the Thunder, and it was pace, it was personnel and spacing at the end of the game, and it was just them getting disrupted. And then, of course, Jokic battering Chet Holmgren all around the court, which that part's not going away.
Exactly. No, and so this is why these are going to be fun games to continue to track. And I do think now Denver is in that class where they could give them trouble. Because I'm telling you, I'm watching that first half and I'm like, I don't know how many teams in the West can beat Oklahoma City right now. Because you just need to know yourself. Because Oklahoma City, to their credit, and it is a machine. It is the same stuff over and over again. And at very similar efficiencies on both sides of the ball. So you better know who you are, how you are playing, and be able to go to those things over and over again to compete with them. I didn't think Denver had that right now. And maybe Russ just unlocked that yesterday, and that's a hard thing to bank on. But we saw it. It happened last night. And it makes Oklahoma City seem a little bit more human than I thought they were going into it.
Signature win for the Denver Nuggets, first loss for the Thunder. But on the other side, we're going to talk about the Golden State Warriors, who also got what I think is their first signature win of the season, beating the Boston Celtics, and in somewhat convincing fashion. Not in that it was a blowout, but that it looked like it was because they did something they know they can do again. And then later in the show, we're obviously going to do a deep dive on the Timberwolves. But first, let me tell you guys about our sponsors here. Game Time, with killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and the lowest price guarantee. Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets. I love that all-in pricing feature that's right on the front page. So as soon as you open the app, you just hit that, so you're not surprised at checkout with hidden fees or taxes or anything like that. You know the price that's on the screen as you're trying to pick what seat you want. That's going to be the price when you get to checkout, so you're not thrown off and confused. You also hop on there and you can peruse whatever's going on in your neck of the woods. Maybe there's no games in town, your team's on the road, but you didn't know there was a festival or a concert. You hop on there, you can scroll and see what events are going on and be confident that you're getting the best deals. And they also have that last-minute ticket pricing, flash deals, zone deals. You can set alerts. So, hey, I really want to go to this concert or this game, but the ticket prices are high. Set an alert, and it'll notify you if the ticket prices drop. So take the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and do us a favor. Use our code ALLNBA. You get $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply, but again, create an account and redeem the code ALLNBA. It really helps us out, but it also gets you $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last-minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. Let's talk about goals for a minute. How are you tracking with the ones you set for your business earlier this year? It's end of year. It's time to start reviewing your goals and time to start setting goals for your upcoming year. Well, Constant Contact can help you out with all of your year-end goals. Constant Contact has what it takes to help you meet them faster, no matter how experienced you are with digital marketing. Constant Contact has the tools to make your marketing run smoother. Sell more, raise more, and build more genuine relationships with your audience with Constant Contact's suite of digital marketing tools, all made to fast-track your success. You no longer need to struggle with expensive, slow, and unmeasurable approaches to marketing your business. Tap email marketing that helps you create and send the perfect email to every customer. Own the smartphone game by adding texting to your marketing strategy. Connect with over 2 billion people on social media with an all-in-one tool for posting and sharing, and sell more online in less time with Constant Contact's powerful e-commerce tools. It's time to put the go in your 2024 business goals with email, social, SMS, and customized marketing campaigns built for you in just a few clicks. Ready, set, go to constantcontact.com/allcity and start your free trial today. Go to constantcontact.com/allcity for your free trial. Back here, segment 2 of the All NBA show. Legler is off today, so we have the great Dane Moore. If you're looking for Timberwolves content, check out the Dane Moore Basketball Podcast, the very aptly named Dane Moore Basketball Podcast. We're going to get to them in just a second, but first, I want to talk about another big win. I don't know what to make of these Golden State Warriors. Actually, I think I do. I think last night I made a decision on the Warriors. They're really good. And shocker, like right, a team with 4 championships, but what they did last night defensively, they gave up like 14 points in 3 minutes or 18 points or something like that in 3 minutes. So if you cut out that part, the second and third quarter of this game was a defensive masterclass, I thought, from the Warriors. And here's what the Celtics do, Dane. They spread you out, 5 out, and they set little guard-to-guard screens and then slip them. And you have to trap the ball because they're so good at turning the corner one-on-one, but you also have to recover quickly off those traps to not give up the like quick swing pass for a 3. And they do it over and over and over again, and no one can stop it until last night. Draymond Green having an unbelievable defensive year, and the guys around them all seem locked in. They're like following his lead. There's a lot of guys trying to be Draymond right now on that team, and they were so good at covering ground. It was like they were sprinting off of every exchange. And that to me is what stuck with me, is that their defense looks real because they all are on a string and are firing at 100% speed.
Group buy-in, man. Reminds me of the Wolves last year. Like defensively, I mean, and just the connectivity of the group and the effort. You know, the effort to finish plays defensively, navigating the initial action you're talking about, you know, whether it's the split cut or whatever they're trying to get to, is particularly with Boston, you have to have that sense of urgency because they're going to get to that 3 right away off of it. And you can't be reactive. You cannot be reactive against Boston. And Golden State, not just tonight, but all season, has been a very proactive team. And I think, yes, that starts with Draymond, and he's having a great defensive season. But it's the first time in a few years where it feels like Draymond is the leader of a group of defenders.
Yep.
And
Love that.
What stood out to me in preseason when I was watching some Warriors games is depth. A depth of guys who will do that. Kyle Anderson was on that Timberwolves team, you know, last season, and he's somebody you can plug in there, and you know you are going to get not just competent but good defense behind him. Gary Payton, even Buddy Hield is playing with an effort there. I know we're not putting Buddy Hield into the super helpful defensively, but he is.
Yeah. No, he looks right. I mean, part of this is just, is everybody executing the game plan, and are they doing it at full speed? You're not as good of a defender. You're going to get blown by, but are you executing at least so everybody knows what we're trying to do and where the help should come from? And they are, man. And this is something Boston does well too, by the way. The Warriors on the other end of the floor, they also run a lot of movement, a lot of, you know, quick screen and release. And you have to, if there's a half-second delay on that switch or on the trap when you're supposed to release, if there's a half-second delay, you get burned. And I thought Boston did a great job of this too. It was 2 defenses that were on a string going back and forth. But to my surprise, what stood out even more was the Warriors' side of that, the Warriors defense. But Buddy Hield, how will we remember Buddy Hield when it's all said and done? You know, like where are you going to remember his time? And I'm watching this and I'm going, he's a Warrior. He's a Golden State Warrior. He should have been there his whole career because he clearly fits into this. And he shoots the ball so unbelievably quick while still maintaining proper shot selection. He only, quote unquote, only took 7 threes, was 4 of 7. And yet all of them came with like this much daylight, and he just seems to have a sense in there. Like he fits into what they're doing because he's ready to shoot when it's his turn, but he's also not stepping out of line. And he's having a revitalization that I look at and I go, he should have always been there. That's the system now that maximizes all the great stuff he does.
Adam, I thought for like 3, 4, 5 years that Buddy Hield is the best movement shooter role player in the league. You know, obviously, you know, you got the Lillard and the Stephs and the stuff like that who are more of, you know, they are elite movement shooters there too. But more of I think Hield is the class of the Malik Beasley's, the Buddy Hield, or sorry, the Patty Mills's, those type of players. You know what I'm saying? Where it's just, there's a constant movement to it, and you can never not have that acknowledged in your game plan against them. And you go, oh, Buddy Hield, this isn't that special of a player. If you're not ready for that, Hield will move, and he will, the amount of attention or credit you don't give him, he will turn up his volume accordingly so as to adapt to that. And you said only took 7 last night. It's because Boston was an attached team.
Right.
But if you see the Warriors against a bad defensive team or a team that does not play on a string, like, take the over on made threes for Buddy Hield. Like, seriously, because he's going to take them. He's just going to, he's always played that way. It's just through bouncing around through different teams and from not having a commitment to defense and an effort to defense, his role has just waned again, like a lot of those Malik Beasley's, Patty Mills type guys. But once you were able to get a movement shooter type player to really fit as a major part of your game plan that you are going to use every night, no matter what, that is just a weapon that you have to plan for like a star. Yeah. You need to account for Buddy Hield like a star. And he's had it, man. I love what you said. Like, he should have been on this team the whole time. We should have been Buddy Hield should be like a guy of this generation as this 3-point volume stuff has taken off, because he is the limit does not exist on how many threes he can take.
I was thinking about this morning. The Thunder are pretty exhausting to play against because they rotate on defense so well, and you just feel like you're stuck in the mud and it gets exhausting. I think the Celtics are exhausting because they make so many threes. I think the Warriors might be the most exhausting team to play. For one, they play an 11-man rotation. They go extremely hard. I mean, that's really deep. Like, benches, we're going to talk about this, the Warriors. A good bench in the NBA is a huge luxury because very few teams have them. And the Warriors, I wouldn't have guessed, have a good bench because you look at some of the names, you're not sure they're going to be able to perform. Lindy Waters, for example, you didn't know if he was going to perform. But they go 11 deep, and I think part of that is because they know it's exhausting to play them on both ends of the court, and we're going to need 11 guys because we're going to be more fresh than you. And that bared out down the stretch. And I think that's going to be a real weapon for him. Obviously, health becomes an issue when you play 11 guys, but I think the Warriors have always been exhausting because Steph Curry gets hot and it's demoralizing. But defensively, they just fly around, and offensively, you have to fly around to match them. And I think it's going to be one of their biggest weapons all year.
And I think they also have the personnel in the starting lineup that you don't have to play 28 to 32 minutes a night, right? I'm looking at it now. Trace Jackson Davis played 16 minutes and Moses Moody played 13 and a half, right? I mean, they played as much as the bench, and in many cases, less than the bench guys there. And not to keep referencing the Wolves, but like, you know, a struggle the Wolves are having is they are deep as well, but they don't have guys in the starting lineup that you don't want to turn down Julius Randle's minutes to 24, right? What Wolves starter are you going to turn down to 16? You know what I'm saying?
Right.
It helps having a lot of depth when you don't necessarily have a ton in your starting lineup, if that makes sense. That makes them sound bad. It's just working though. Like, the depth seems to really replace it.
The Warriors in their heyday had the death lineup. That wasn't the starting lineup. That was their punch that they could go to. And I think, so maybe it's in their DNA that in their absolute golden era, they were able, you know, they were built that way to Iguodala's off the bench doesn't matter. He comes in and when it matters. And so that it naturally lends itself to that. But let's move to the Wolves now, because this is what's kind of interesting about them. You are right that you can't tell Julius Randle he's not playing a bunch of minutes. And he has a value, a utility that's really high for them and does some things that are really high for him. But I know from hearing your show, you know, as I was prepping for this, it's the staggered lineups that are most promising about them right now. And that's a huge strength to them. And I do think they're going to find a way to lean on that strength. And it actually, when we get to the middle part of the season, I think the 3 or 4 teams that actually have depth, they're going to have an advantage there. But at the same time, the starting lineup to me is still a little bit clunky. It's still one I don't know if I fully believe in. So let's just talk about the starting lineup to begin with. Where are you at with that? And where do you see to be the most important sort of details with it?
So it seemed pre-Cat trade, right, that the Wolves were going to be way exposed at point guard, and a ton was going to have to go on 37-year-old Mike Conley. The point guard depth chart was Mike Conley and 37-year-old Mike Conley and 19-year-old Rob Dillingham, right?
Yeah.
And it was like, okay, this is going to be an adventure. And it is crazy how this one trade, bringing in DiVincenzo and Randle, has so changed the amount of playmaking that Mike Conley has to do. He was so important to, like, let's just control our offense and not turn it over. I mean, Ant's a high turnover. It's just a young team, want to make bad decisions. And Mike was such a stabilizer there. And now there just is not as great of a need for that playmaking or for just that point guarding, because you have Ant doing more. You have Julius Randle, who they're basically, I mean, it looks like a heliocentric whatever type offense when they're playing through Randle there. And what I think is happening with the starters is Mike Conley is becoming kind of irrelevant because he isn't being asked to do that. And then how he would be relevant is like, okay, hey, make 45% of your open threes here, which he hasn't done yet. So Mike is in this weird place. And then again, pre-Cat trade, it was the plan to really emphasize Jaden McDaniels more this season on the offensive side of the ball and get him more. He's just had such a small part of the pie. He was going to be more of a playmaker. They were going to run pick and roll with him. They were going to run direct actions for him. Finch talked about that openly. But again, you bring in Julius Randle and you bring in Donte DiVincenzo, who are two guys who are frankly just better at that than Jaden is. Well, now McDaniels is in a weird sort of spot here too, where he's almost being asked to do less than he ever has before. And again, focusing on his three-point shot, which is not his bread and butter in terms of offense. I mean, he's had 39% seasons. It's not like he's a non-shooter, but he's just being relegated to a very tertiary piece, and that's preventing him from getting a rhythm. So now we have 2/5 of the starting lineup that is not finding themselves offensively. And Gobert has been helpful offensively. Julius has been, is super hot shooting, super effective offensively. And then Ant has been doing what Ant's been doing. But there's just this sort of like, what are Conley and McDaniels doing? And it feels consistently bizarre until they sub in one of Alexander Walker, Reed, or DiVincenzo, and then it starts making sense again. So I don't know. It's just so clear that at this moment on November 7th, that the Wolves' best 5-man lineup is not their starting 5.
Right.
The question is, do you want to continue going in that, in that direction? How long do you give that? How important is it that 5 really finds itself? Right now, it just feels wonky, even though Randle's been awesome.
What I think, and it is only 8 games, I do think like you give, especially when you make a big trade like that, 20 games is sort of this 20 games are going to be figuring it out games. But what I think is, when you say those things about Mike Conley and Jaden McDaniels in particular, part of me goes, do they matter though? And when I say matter, they obviously matter as players, but do they matter enough to alter anything? Because I look at it and I go, I like Jaden McDaniels. His role might be to make threes from the corner. And yes, he has more to his game, but this team is different than last year's team. And what you really need is your defense. And we need you to accept that role. Mike Conley, you love having him as a safety blanket late in games. He's going to get you a good shot. He's not going to turn it over, which is really valuable. But first, second, third quarter might be less valuable when you need you to make threes. And the team doesn't need to change those parts. Those guys just have to settle into those roles.
The problem there, though, is Jaden, like many defenders, needs a little bit of offensive juice to engage himself defensively. I know that's a roll your eye thing, and I agree. It's frustrating. I'm sitting here, I'm like, but they remember how like the Thunder would post up Kendrick Perkins on like the first possession, or Steven Adams. You know who takes the first shot? Yeah. You know who takes the first shot for the Wolves a lot? Jaden McDaniels. They're trying to play that, and it's just, I mean, he had a good defensive game against Charlotte, the Wolves' last game on Monday. and really did kind of take out LaMelo. And that's what they need him to do. That is
100%.
top of the chart there. But he also missed his first 7 shots of that game. And so at least in that game, they got the defense from him without the offense. But there is totally something, or has been for the past couple of years, of if Jaden does get going offensively, you get a little bit more defense for him. And Finch always refers to Jaden McDaniels as the barometer for the offense. He goes, if Jaden, if Jaden's needle is moving upwards, our team offense is going up there. So I hear what you're saying. I just don't think that's where Finch and McDaniels are at in their heads.
It's a really tough thing. And to be honest with you, it's one of the things that separates championship teams from very good teams is like, are you willing just to be the other thing that's maybe less sexy, but the irony of it is always become sexy when you win. Then it's like, oh, you know who really made an impact? Andre Iguodala or whatever it is, the guy that wasn't scoring.
And that's Nickeil Alexander-Walker, right? Your boy. Like,
that's why I was going to get to right here, because first of all, I love Nickeil Alexander-Walker. This has been my thing. I didn't think he would even become this good, but I loved what he did anyway. And he epitomizes the exact thing I'm talking about with Jaden McDaniels. They're averaging the same number of points right now. And I think there was something to Nickeil Alexander-Walker when he got to Minnesota, because he was always a guy that tried too much. Like, I actually hated his game before. I loved his defense, but I was like, offensively, can you tell him to stop? And when he got to Minnesota, he's kind of accepted what he does and just finds spots to fit into the offense and to make an impact. He handles the ball a lot more, but I watch him and I go, he comes in ready every time he checks in. He gets right into his defender and just starts guarding every single time. And then offensively, it just feels to me like he has figured out how to be a part of the offense without forcing being a part of the offense, just fitting in. And as a result, guess what? He's averaging as many points as Jaden McDaniels. Sometimes like you don't chase it and it comes to you. And that's why I say that about Jaden McDaniels. But Nickeil Alexander-Walker is a bright spot, because that guy is a huge part of why the Wolves have a good bench. And that's a huge luxury.
Huge. What I think is interesting is you remember the early Alexander-Walker days, and Finch was with Alexander Walker in New Orleans there, and he gave a great answer pregame to a reporter last week, where he was like, Nickeil would just fight me all the time in New Orleans, and he would fight, and he would and you couldn't help him, and he couldn't help himself, and he was just trying to be like his cousin. He was trying to be like at the basket. He was trying to be a point guard, and then he came to Minnesota in the D'Lo trade, kind of like hat in hand, frankly, like maybe on his way out of the league, and was willing to take on that role that you're talking about, that he's doing now, and is a 10 out of 10 in that role. And Nickeil just bought into that role in ways that Jaden hasn't as well in the starting role. And there's a difference there when Nickeil's making $4 million and Jaden's making 23, and there's probably different futures they project for both of those guys. And so but what's happening with Jaden McDaniels in Minnesota, I think, is nowhere near as bad as it was for Nickeil in New Orleans, but it's kind of the same thing. So in many ways, Alexander Walker is the example of McDaniels do this, particularly within the context of this team, because it's such a repeatable thing, Adam. I mean, Nickeil's had 7 good games in 7 games. He hasn't had a bad game yet.
He's good.
And when you're just doing that role, it's like, I mean, he might have some games where he's hitting his shots right now. He might miss some shots, but Nickeil Alexander-Walker can go 1 for 5 from 3 and have a hugely impactful game for the Wolves. Yeah. He's found ways to do that in ways that Jaden hasn't or consistently done, at least.
Well, your point, the one point about this is that the money does matter. And as you mentioned, Jaden McDaniels has made a lot of money and Nickeil Alexander has not. So there is something too. You tell a guy buy in, it'll come to you, but it isn't always true. And it is a tough piece of this. Let me ask you this. If we go through the roster right now, who do you think at this very moment, and there's 75 games still to go, but who do you think in this moment is in the playoff circle of trust, just as to establish a baseline?
Oh, it's the 8 guys. It's the 8 guys who play. And
that's 8. That's enough. Naz Reid, Donte DiVincenzo, Nickeil Alexander-Walker.
Yeah, that's it. And then certainly nobody else. But I think all the starters are in the circle of trust too. I guess in that sense, they're in midseason form or in playoff form. Like when I mean, they're not in, but they know who their guys are. And Finch is just kind of playing those 8 every single night. And I think come April, May, June, that those are going to be the 8 guys that play.
So who's most likely, and I agree with you, by the way, come playoff times, you have those 8 guys healthy. You don't really worry about your 9th guy, and they have, point guard, wing, and center off the bench. So you have everything kind of covered, all the spots covered. But to get through a season, you need more. So who do you think is the next most important guy to enter the circle of trust throughout the course of the season?
I think the closest guy to the Finch's circle of trust right now is Joe Ingles.
Yeah.
And he just trusts a mover. He trusts a guy who can shoot. And Ingles has been playing a 5-minute a game role, where he plays a stint in the first half, and that's it. They had a back-to-back in San Antonio, and the name to watch is Josh Minott. He would be able to do more things than Joe Ingles could. He's another kind of Jaden McDaniels type body type.
Real long, yeah.
Really, really shot it well in preseason, kind of turned a maturity curve, I think, both physically and mentally. If we are, if you and I are having another conversation in 6 weeks and the circle of trust is expanded, I would think it would include Josh Minott. And I think maybe most people on the outside would think it would be Rob Dillingham.
Yeah.
Which isn't to say that Rob couldn't, find his way in. I think whoever gets injured first for the Wolves is going to determine a lot for them.
Yeah. So that's an interesting one because Dillingham is the guy I wanted to get to. Minott's interesting. I haven't seen a whole lot of him. I thought he was more of an offensive player than a defensive player, but maybe he's molding himself back in.
He's just young, man. I mean, he's he's athletic. I mean, he's going to help them with rebounding some. This team needs help with they're missing Cat in that way. I mean, he's going to help a lot more rebounding than Joe Ingles is. There's just times, particularly when Rudy's off the floor, where this team's defense, the paint feels so loose, particularly compared to last season. They've been going to zone a lot and not well, but because they don't trust the Reed and Randle front court defensively there. Minott could kind of help in that way, giving a little bit more size, athleticism, more that fly around mentality. And I mean, the question is, he really changed his shot and was making a ton of them, but we know there's a million athletic guys out there who would help with rebounding on everybody's bench. The question is, are they going to be able to make 38% of their catch and shoot threes? Well, Josh Minott in his first game, he checked in late in the first quarter and he got 3 open corner threes and missed all 3 of them. So early returns in the regular season are poor, but I do think if the circle of trust expands, it'll be Josh Minott's the guy, and one of those where did this dude come from?
So where is Dillingham in this? And actually, let me ask you this: project the year for him. Is this a thing where I think right now in the West, a lot of teams are trying to stabilize? A lot of teams are just trying to be there's no separation yet, so let's just try to get a little separation, rise to the top, and then we can experiment a little bit. Do you think if you were to project his season, do you think this is a matter of he'll be in the rotation in a month's time on a more consistent basis?
I mean, it's been a funny journey for him, or the narrative around him, since draft night. Tim Conley came out, spoke to us in the media on draft night at midnight and was pumped that they got Rob Dillingham. Yeah. They were able to, and he said in one of the first questions he was asked, he was like, Rob will be in the rotation day 1. He said that on draft night.
Yeah.
No. That's pre-Cat trade. That's pre-Cat trade, and they had no point guards. So of course he was going to be. It probably impacted him more than anybody else from a playing time standpoint. Because right now, I mean, DiVincenzo's playing 28 minutes a night, and I'm like, how do you get him 6 more minutes? They want to play the circle of trust guys more than they are. There's not enough minutes there. So the only way in the Dillingham arc that I think he gets into this is somebody gets hurt and he gets an opportunity and does something with that opportunity, which, given that he's a 19-year-old point guard, is decently long odds that he'll be able to come in and be instantly impactful. I think if and when somebody gets hurt in the top 8, whoever it is, I think Minott and Ingles will get those minutes first, and they will shift accordingly that way. Really, the only way I see right now, see Dillingham getting into the mix is if Conley got hurt and you really specifically needed point guard and playmaking. But the biggest surprise of the season for the Wolves, or shift in mentality or thought process, is they have so much more playmaking on the roster than we thought before. And that was just kind of, not maybe understanding the nuanced differences between Cat and Randle. I mean, Randle is a point forward, so there's just not a lot of need for a point guard. I wouldn't be surprised if Rob Dillingham plays very little this season.
So last one I have for you, the climb to the top is always an interesting one. And I think Wolves fans are learning this, right? Like, they had the great year last year, comes a little short, and you think, okay, linear, now we're a contender. Yeah. But one thing that happens to teams as they grow is that you almost take for granted the things that got you there. And I think defensive intensity is what got the Wolves there. They were an unbelievable defensive team. And you saw in the playoffs, those perimeter guys, when they get into it, there's a whole slew of them. You add DiVincenzo, they should have that. Yet I'm not seeing it from them. Defensively this year, they've actually been pretty underwhelming. I can't remember, is it 12th in defensive rating, which is pretty surprising, given what we saw of them. Is that early season malaise, or do you think there's something to this team? Like, are they taking for granted the thing that was their identity that got them to be the Western Conference, contenders?
I just don't think Julius Randle gets that part of it yet. He wasn't here, and there's just not the defensive fire and effort and that fly around mentality. Like, when you played the Wolves last year and you were taking a shot on the perimeter, somebody was closing out on you, and hard, and that was part of their identity. It was like, all right, if they pump and, and they attack here, well, Rudy's here at the rim, they really enforced it. And it created this anxiety for the offense in many ways. And that fly around defensive mentality is not in Julius Randle's DNA. I think he's taking it seriously. I think he's been solid defensively, but he sticks out in when you're watching a Wolves game now versus what your memory was of the Wolves defense. Now, the Wolves were 16th on offense last season and first on defense. So naturally, the idea or the goal of the whole season was, let's bring that 16th up higher, right? And I don't know what it is at now, but I remember before the Charlotte game,
12th.
They were 16th on offense and 18th on defense. So it's
so early, though. It's so early that these offensive ratings and stuff, one game you move up 8 spots. So it's early.
Absolutely. I'm just saying, to the eye test, it kind of feels like that. They feel mediocre on both sides of the ball. Though Randle has been awesome on the offensive side of the ball. And I get it now. I was like a little skeptical. Like, I get the playmaking. He's finding shooters all the time. A lot of Ant's 3-point volume that everyone's making a big deal about is defenses are collapsing on Randle, and he's finding Edwards often. So I do think this offense is going to get better as a product of Randle. Yeah. And I think in time, McDaniels and Conley are going to start making some more shots, and we're going to be like, okay, this is a top 10 offensive team, which is a pretty far cry from what they were last year. Like, watching the Wolves play offense last year was tough, particularly during the regular season. I just don't know where this defense is gonna come in, man, because it's 16 minutes a night with no Rudy out there. That's, like I said, the paint feels loose, and they don't have that same fly around sort of tenacity defensively. I'd love for Randle to just start guarding fives. Just guard fives then, if you're not going to do that, right? And let Nas fly around. What's the alternative? Is Nas is guarding him, right? I'm not saying that's a great option either, but it's been weird how little Randle has been willing to guard. Like, we didn't see Randle on Jokic at all in that game. That was weird to me. I thought, we can't do Randle can't do what Cat did at all.
Not even try that thing. I think if they want to ease into it, that's kind of a big adjustment. You only use it for 2 or 3 players in the NBA. So maybe it was a thing of teams trying to build a base identity, and then we'll add to it as the year goes.
They did use it against Wemby the next night.
Well, there you go.
Didn't work, but they tried it. They at least tried it. Yeah.
There you go. I think the Timberwolves are a really interesting team. Honestly, we talked about 4 of the most interesting teams in the Western Conference: the Nuggets, the Warriors, the Mavs. Did we get to anybody else? Or I'm sorry, the Timberwolves. So 3 of the most interesting teams in the West. And, nobody is shaken out yet. I mean, outside of the Thunder, the Suns have looked impressive, and the Warriors are obviously looking impressive right now. But it feels like right now we don't know behind the Thunder who those other teams are going to be. Could be the Timberwolves, could be Denver. could be a handful of other teams. He is Dane Moore, the Dane Moore Basketball Podcast, extremely popular. If you're a Timberwolves fan, you probably already know about it. If you're not a Timberwolves fan and you want to learn about the Timberwolves, that's the show to go to. He is doing daily updates and always has great guests, great analysis, and you're in Chicago right now covering the team?
I am. Yep. We got Wolves Bulls tonight. So
there you go. Well, thank you so much, man.
They're on an easy stretch here, man. The Wolves might be able to stabilize themselves a little bit. It's like Bulls tonight, and then 3 of the next 4 are against the Blazers. So there might be some inflation there.
Underrated, by the way. You look at the Milwaukee Bucks, their schedule has been a nightmare and they're tail spinning right now. And you look at it and you go, oh, they're on the road for nothing but tough games for the next month. Yeah, this might get ugly.
Seriously.
So, early season schedule, man, can be a blessing or a curse depending on which way it flips for you. Thank you so much for joining. You were fantastic as always. And everybody, hit that like button on the way out. We'll see you tomorrow with Tim Legler back. We'll see you then.
Silly like the mayor.